Hello out there. Welcome in the AutoCrit world. I am here in front of a lovely red curtain, and that's because we do have a little bit of a reveal today. However, you're going to have to wait till the end to watch that. How's that for a hook, right? And speaking of hooks, I'm here with Gareth in his hook outfit there. I love it. Fishing Auto.
I got my fishing line. Hello, everybody.
So he's out looking for some great hooks, which you will need in order to be successful in what we're going to talk about today, which is short stories. We're going to talk about short story structure and the bones of a short story and how short stories differ from full-length works. So I'm looking forward to this. We have people from all over. I'm not going to bore you all by just reading all of this, but I did see a funny comment, and now I cannot find it. Hold on. Yes. Well, a cute comment that V Moore apparently is working on a short fantasy about a lonely troll. And Gareth and I were wondering if this means a troll under a bridge or a social media troll. Both could be good, just very different. I'm assuming if it's a fantasy, she means like the troll that might be under a bridge. Although I don't know, that might be too stereotypical for the kind of troll she has in mind. Maybe she's about to rewrite what trolls do. I'm excited. I like trolls. All right. So anyway, we're going to talk about short stories, and we're going to go through some tips. If you want to write an effective short story, these aren't going to be in any particular order. We're just going to go through some of the things that we think about when we're crafting a short story or advising somebody about short story. Excuse me. I am a little bit congested today. Don't worry. I feel fine. It's just allergy season for me around here.
I think it's quite useful in this one as well. If you're watching, let us know in the chat what you prefer. Do you struggle with shorts or do you struggle to go longer? What is it? What kind of split are we looking at here among our people? Personally, I would say I prefer the short form. Just it's easier. And for me, easier. I hate to say it's easy because people who can't find it really hard to write shorts, like it's not easy.
Yeah, and there are people like that.
Yeah, sure, and hopefully we can help with a few of those problems today, as well as we point out some of the major differentiators, because some of it is a mindset approach, to the story itself and how you're tackling it. But that said, yeah, let us know.
All right. It's funny. People are pointing out where they live, and it's just funny because in the last few minutes I had from the piney woods of East Texas. I used to live in that area. Gladewater, Warren City, Gilmer. Yep. And greetings from Central Florida, which is where I live now. So how's about that? That's kind of weird, right? People are following me.
How many people are trying to pronounce it even now? Welcome, Peter from Worcestershire, the
Worcestershire,
sauce place.
Yes. The sauce place.
Worcestershire.
Is it really from there, or is that just like a misnomer?
I believe it is. It's
okay.
Worcestershire sauce.
Okay. I mean, sometimes like Russian salad dressing is not really from Russia. Anyway, I digress. This isn't a food channel. When it comes to short stories, one thing that you need to do is consider the length. Yes. Consider the fact that this isn't, in fact, a short story, right? And part of that, usually with short stories, maybe you're writing for some sort of anthology, which will have certain criteria. You really need to keep track of that word count because it can become critical.
Yeah, there's some kind of technical things that go into this as well. I don't think any of the limits are really 100% a lot of the time, as is much in kind of writing and storytelling. But technically speaking, if you wanted to kind of put limits on, impose a limit on yourself, it might be helpful to do so to try to stay short. Short stories would normally be categorized up to about 10,000 words. Whenever you go above that, I think it's between 10 and 40, you're in looking at a novella. But again, that said, there's also the novelette that some people like to refer to as well, which is somewhere between 7,500 and 19,000. So some people would call that a novella. Also, others will say it's a novelette and try to be, maybe a little too specific about it. However, that said, from practical experience, if you're looking around, if you write short stories and you're looking around anthology calls and like periodical magazines and things like that accept short stories, you will generally see 10,000 is like the upper limit. Mostly, I would tend to see about 7,500 or 5,000. Would tend to be the maximum you'll see in a lot of anthology calls. So maybe thinking around 5 to 7.5K. But in terms of a minimum, 2,000 words usually is the minimum. At most places under 2,000 would consider that flash fiction, and unless they say they take flash fiction, they wouldn't take anything shorter than 2,000.
Yeah, when it's that short. And then of course flash fiction can go all the way down to be like, what is it, 5 words, or
yeah
depends on what you're going for.
I want to say they call those I've never done them drabbles. Is it drabbles or dribbles?
Yeah,
where it's like 100 words.
Yeah, I know too. Like the people have done essentially flash fiction on like Twitter, and it's just been with the Twitter characters, and they've considered that flash fiction. So, like you said, it's not an exact science when you use these sort of terms. All right. One thing to keep in mind is that this isn't just about length. Short stories are not short novels. This is you really do need to reorient your thinking. If you try to do all of the complexity, the nuance, the layers in the amount of time, as you can imagine, it's not going to work very well. It is a different medium, much like short film is different than a full-length film, or all different kinds of things. It's just not a matter of extracting one little piece, although sometimes you can do that if it's self-contained enough, but you certainly are not going to be able to get enough content that would fill up a whole novel into 10,000 words. It's just not going to happen. So you do have to rethink how you're writing if you typically do write lengthier stories. Do you have anything to add about that? It seems kind of obvious, but
yeah, it depends on our further breakdown here today. But there's lots of ways that things become a lot more truncated.
Yes.
Simply if you try to lay out a narrative in a short form exactly like you would in a novel, you're quickly going to find that word count spiraling out of control.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I mean, we have our handy dandy beat sheet for a full-length novel. I would imagine that would be a difficult tool. Maybe if you have 10,000 words, but if you have a shorter work, you're not going to be able to do all those beats necessarily, or certainly certain points are going to have to cover multiple beats. Like it's just not going to have enough time to go out all of that stuff. So, all right. Oh, somebody says it's not obvious for the newbies. Glad you're covering it for the others. Yeah, we never know where people are coming from. And sometimes people think it's like, oh, well, I just have to be kind of this edited Cliff Notes version of a bigger story. And yeah, you can do that, but think about how much lesser a Cliff Notes version of a book is, right? And this is even less than that often, because when they're doing a summary, they often do a lot more words than what you might do for a short story, right? So yeah, you just can't have that level of complexity. But we're going to go into more detail about how you have to simplify. So remember also, not all stories can be short stories. You may find in the process of writing a short story that you're just trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, to use a cliche. You might find that this is just not going to work, and that's okay. Put that project aside. That can be the groundwork for a novel, right? It's not the end of the world. You just have to keep going. On the flip side, you might find the opposite. You might be thinking, oh, this is going to be a full-on novel, and then you get to the point where you're like, well, actually, I'm just going to tread water because I've kind of said what I needed to say, and then I just need to get to the ending, in which case, yeah, you got a short story. There's differences in what the format does. So just realize if it's not working as a short story, it could be that it's just not a short story. So don't panic about it. All right, so getting a little bit more into the details, you may need to plan more for a short story than you do for your normal writing, and that is just because of the length. There are limitations, especially if you're trying to get into an anthology or a contest or something like that. And so if you don't actually know where you're going, what you can end up doing is discovery writing yourself into thousands upon thousands of words, and you're still not even at the end, and you're running out of page count. And then what you'll either do is just a really quick ending that's not very satisfying, or you'll have to go back and edit, and you can create a big mess for yourself. So if you're not typically a planner, I would recommend at least attempting a little bit more if you're trying to do a short story. I think they can be harder to just kind of spit out unless you plan on doing a whole lot of rewriting, which is probably what Gareth is going to tell me that he does most of the time.
Well, I think a lot of rewriting is fair. That tends to happen anyway. But I will say, yeah, I do find planning out shorts to be beneficial for me. I do it. I'll pretty much outline any full short story, just a sentence here or two, a sentence or two here and there, just to say this is what happens, then they do this next, and then this happens, and I'll just flesh that out as I write it, and try not to go overboard. And there's a couple of things I'm sure we'll cover throughout the points today of kind of making things too beefy, really in terms of the writing becomes too much, and I have to go back after that, and of course rewrite, edit, cut it down. Sometimes it can even be the opposite. I'm trying to hit a goal and I can't stretch it that far, and that becomes painful when you want to hit 4,000 but everything's done at around 2,800. It's kind of, whoa, how do I do this without it just being fluff, which is tough as well. So yeah, planning can really help with that. I definitely agree.
Yeah. It's just like any other art form with writing. Like as soon as you do something like, like I think of it in terms of, I've written a lot of music and lyrics and stuff. And so getting stuff into that format, you start limiting your ideas. But like you said, then sometimes you can go into a concept and you're like, well, I have a whole other verse and I want to do something, but I don't want to just put in stuff, right? So yeah, as soon as you give yourself that framework of it has to be this length, this many words, it creates a different sort of challenge, because really novels can be, not however long you want, but there's so much more of a wiggle room there, right? Whereas this automatically kind of puts you into a bind, but it can be really helpful as an exercise to do as an author. So if you haven't done it, I really recommend writing a short story at some point, because you might find out that you're really great at it and you didn't know, or you might find out that you hate it, but it's a good exercise. Doesn't matter. Either way. We have a couple of examples here. Phil started a short story that ended up about 17,000 words. Yep. And then Lady is the opposite. She goes in to write a novel and it ends up a short story. So you can see two ends of the extreme, right? This is what happens when you are writing. Sometimes, like Garrett says, you have too many ideas, and sometimes you don't seem to have enough ideas to stretch it out. You don't need that much length.
Yeah, it's painful either way. Sometimes you sit down, and I've done it. Sit down to write a 5,000 word thing. Next thing is 12K, and when you get there as well, you feel like nothing can really change. It's like you can pare it down, but it starts to remove the story when you want to get to that initial thing. So you're stuck with this like 12, 13K thing that doesn't really fit into any bracket around. You just have to find the best thing to do with it. Maybe just putting it into a collection of some kind.
I love this. After starting a novel, I regretted not starting with short fiction. Novels take forever. That's another good point. I mean, especially if you're an early writer, short stories can be so helpful for your self-confidence, because, you can get it done, you can get it finished, you can really polish it, you can get it up to a really high professional level, perhaps submit it, perhaps get published or recognized a lot easier than a novel. And I don't mean it's easy, like what Gareth was saying, right? But it is easier in a certain sense in terms of the time and the productivity, less to worry about, partly because of what I have right here behind me. Short stories do tend to fixate on a specific thing for the sake of clarity. You're not necessarily running all over the place with a whole lot of different things. It tends to be more simplistic in terms of the plot, in terms of the conflict, and whatnot. And I know Gareth has some points that he wants to bring up, like they tend to have a smaller cast of characters.
Indeed, yeah. When it comes to short form, focus is key, and it really is narrowing your kind of vision, almost getting tunnel vision on whatever it is that's being talked about in this story, what the story's about. I'm sure we'll get to themes in a minute, in terms of a longer form piece, but a short story will focus a lot more in on smaller selections of pretty much everything, and one of those is characters. You'll tend to find that a short would focus entirely on one single main character, and the presentation of that doesn't really matter whether it's going to be first person, second person, third person, whichever way you're approaching it. It's still one main character. But that also leads into, I think, a really good kind of mindset thing when you have a story idea and you're considering, is this better as a short, or is this better as a long form piece? I think a really key consideration for that is think about the concept. What was the idea that first came to your mind about this? It's a person stuck on a bus to hell, that kind of thing. And I'm going to do a story about that. Now, if the idea, when you think about what you're wanting to kind of explore in that story, the more you think about it, becomes more complex, and it seems like it would actually benefit from more characters, characters with whom we can actually get close and understand their differing perspectives. If they can look at the theme and the concept from different angles, and that feels like it would make the story richer, like that would be the way to do this, well, then a long form approach to it, making it a novel, might actually be the better option, because there's much more interesting areas you can dig into there. However, I hate when things seem to get stretched out to that longer length for no reason. If the concept and the theme and how your main character is kind of interacting with that seems like it would be just kind of a quick one and done. You can say it quite easily and quickly. Then I would say go for the short. Keep it really focused, keep it narrow, because a story that is unnecessarily stretched out will run out of steam very quickly. And it's easy to pick up on that. You can see it really, really easily when you're reading a novel, and things just seem to be meandering back and forth, and a lot in the middle. Curse of the Second Act is just not really having any impact. It seems to be there just to fill out the word count, and you can see it in movies as well. How many times have you seen some films that people would say would have made the concept would have made a great short film, or even 30 minutes, but stretching it out to 90 minutes and 100 minutes, it just runs out of steam very, very quick, and then everything just drags on. So it's really thinking about what is the story. And the way I always like to say this too is, if you consider what a story is kind of the melding or the clash of concept, character, and theme. These three things come together to actually develop a story. None of them on their own are a story. It's the combination of all three. And thinking about that combination again, is it richer if we get lots more perspectives from other characters on that? And of course, that would introduce different events with these different characters. And if the answer to that is yes, maybe think long form. Although that's not to say that a short story can't have a large cast. You can have a plethora of minor characters who are on the outside, sort of surrounding the main character. Kind of settings like that immediately come to mind for me are things like game shows or marathons. Maybe they're a marathon runner. Of course, there's going to be other characters all around them. There's people everywhere. But the crucial difference really is that as the author in a short, you won't be digging in deeply into the minds of these other characters. They're maybe going to have a bit of an interaction with the main character, but they're the main character. We're with them for this whole time, because you got to get a lot of bang for the buck in a short.
Yeah, for sure. We did get a question about a quantity limit. We don't really have a hard and fast rule, but what I would think of, when you're adding characters in a story, what you're really adding is another world view. If you want them to earn their spot on the page, right? Because otherwise they're just a echo of the thoughts of another person, right? So to Garrett's point, the more worldviews you're going to add, the more nuanced and complex your work is going to be. And if you want to give all those different views, their fair due, depending on how much time you need to get into all of those different perspectives, you may be talking more long form if you get too many in there. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to simplify that view to, just its core, which depending on the conflict might work fine because, you don't need it. You don't need that much space in order to fully explore that viewpoint. So it just depends. It's not there's not a hard and fast rule. Did you have anything else to say about that, Gareth?
No, all good.
Okay, we're good. All right, so moving on. Fewer conflicts. Yes, so we have, you might see this is a little bit of a theme, right? Less is more is kind of the key when it comes to short stories. So often you do have less characters, less viewpoints to consider because you need them. You need to be able to explore all the viewpoints you have as much as you can. Same thing with conflicts. While a novel will have, a major overall conflict, you generally will have all these little problems to worry about just to keep the story going, to grow the characters, to give you insight to the richness of the world, etc., etc. Short stories often don't have that luxury of space, and so you have to limit yourself down to a lot less concerns, a lot less conflicts, a lot less obstacles.
Yeah, we don't have the time. That's really the way to sum it up there.
Yeah.
The fewer conflicts, novel can contain many, many different layers of conflict. And people have maybe heard me talk about this before. The way I like to visualize it, as I like to kind of structuralize and break things down, is a full-length novel as almost like a straight timeline And I'll mark out all these different conflicts that were, the origin point is kind of point A and the resolution point at point B. And ultimately, in a really involving novel, you want to have a line that is filled with all these intercrossing little arcs as these different conflicts arise and resolve at different points that cover the whole thing, because they're essentially the fuel, especially when you're writing suspense and horror and things like that. These unresolved conflicts and problems are the fuel that are keeping you going throughout this whole story. Obviously, as you're following the main conflict of the plot as well, which kind of hangs above everything else. But having this crisscross and all these things going on is great. It keeps you going. But in a short, again, we're here for the punch. And it's usually just keeping you a lot more focused and under control when you focus on one really single core conflict that's at the heart of this story. Usually in a short as well, you'll tend to find that the solution to the conflict is relatively simple. It can't be too convoluted with too much to do and everything, because again, explaining all of that takes up word count, and we just don't have the space for it.
Yeah, so things like misdirection, red herrings, all of these things are not impossible to do in a short story, but tend to be tricky, especially if you do layer upon layer of them, right? You do some like labyrinth plot with twists and turns. Generally not what's going to happen in a short story, just because of the lack of space. If you try to pull your audience through something like that, it'll be like, running through a maze. You'll get whipped around one way or the other. And if that's what you're going for, perhaps something really chaotic, you might be able to pull it up, but often it's just going to not give any of those points their fair shake, and you would be better off stretching it out. Well, not stretching it out, but actually exploring it properly in a full-length work.
Yeah, that's I think part of the key of this as well. A lot of these tips too is, remember, are kind of I'm not going to say best practice, but differentiators and key things to keep in mind. It's not to say you can't break any of them. Like this particular thing, you can make really surprising revelations and surprises and things in a short story, but it's a lot tougher to do because you don't have the time to plant the seeds, and let them gestate.
And also just think about, a big plot twist like the classic third act twist or something where it's like, whoa, everything I thought up to this point was a lie. Well, that really hits you hard when it's like 50,000-60,000 words into a book, because you got really invested in what you thought was reality and it's not. If you're like 3,000 words in, I mean, that's not to say you can't have a twist like that, but no, it doesn't quite hit you the same way, right? So it might be to your benefit to explore that sort of concept in a bigger work if that's what you're trying to do. All right. Oh, this is a good question. Do you have any tips in writing short stories with a twist that is believable and resonates with the reader? Well, I don't know about specifically short stories. However, we do have an entire episode dedicated towards plot twists in the future. So just stay tuned to this channel because that's a big topic. Hold on. I like this. I spent about 100 hours on a 630 word flash fiction. Didn't feel like a sprint. I mean, this is the thing, right? As much as I say, oh, it's easier because it's less words, I don't really mean it like that exactly, because that's not entirely true. Just like poetry, people will spend hundreds, thousands of hours, just down to this specific word choice, right? To some degree, you have to have an even keener editor mind, right? Because every word, not that they don't have to earn their spot on a page in a novel, but all the more in a short story. But what I'm getting at when I think it's a great thing for early writers to do is just the investment for the audience is as much, so you have more likely that people are going to read all the way through it, give you feedback, and it's just less for you to worry about at one time. And so it can be a lot less overwhelming for you to look at something that's, this big versus this big, I have found that to be helpful for a lot of early writers. But yeah. I by no means want to imply that it's easier to write short stories than full-length novels just on the face of it, because that's not really true.
Yeah, it's kind of like I said earlier, it can be when you're at the two ends of kind of struggling to short and struggling to get longer. It's almost equally torturous.
Yeah.
At both ends. And trying to get something down to, like a 630 flash, if you had a 600 word limit, and trying to tell a full story in theirs, the value of every single one of those words goes up incrementally. And that is a lot more pressure. So yeah, it can be tough.
Yeah. Shorter's not easier. I have a hard time killing my darlings. We're gonna get there. Don't worry. We love to talk about killing darlings. uh, isn't it easier to just write out the story and then go back and decide where it needs help, either cutting or adding? It is for a lot of people. Often they're referred to as pantsers or discovery writers or gardeners. For a lot of people, it's easier to just go out there and then trim afterwards, right? The problem is, one reason why I said earlier that you might want to plan more with a short story is because if you just kind of free write, well, you could end up kind of painting yourself into a corner, because if you're only supposed to have a piece that's 7,000 words long and then you've written 10, well, cutting 30% could be challenging. It's especially depending on how much bloat you tend to write in a first draft, because you might be a pretty, clean writer in terms of the length. It's more kind of edging and stuff. So yeah, it just depends. It really depends. So that's going to depend. That's going to be based on the person. All right. Short stories tend to be intense, and that's because, well, you're getting very focused on one specific thing for this moment, and we actually have the luxury that the audience can handle a lot of intensity, because rather than ratcheting it up and having to hold them for 70,000 words, well, we got them for a short bit of time, so we can really pow. So what about intensity when it comes to short stories, Gareth?
Yeah, it's intense in almost every aspect. I like to put this in here as high intensity, not just in terms of the storytelling, because of course you might say, well, mine's a romantic short. That's not an intense thing, but not entirely just in terms of the narrative, but in terms of your focus as a writer. One of the things that we kind of touched on earlier is, in a full length novel, you kind of have the luxury to spend some time exploring many different themes as well. You can have a good nice piled handful of things that you're talking about as the story progresses, through interacting with all these different characters and everything. When it comes to shorts, you're usually only going to find one theme in specific that this story is, quote unquote, about. The actual core, the heart of the story, is going to be one thing, perhaps two. There might be a couple in there, of course. It's not entirely rigid, but nowhere near as much as can be explored in the course of a full novel, because again, you have the space and time to in a full novel also craft a journey in terms of that story. You're starting at if we think back to the discussion people were having a few minutes ago about the beat sheets, for a full novel or screenplay, you have the luxury of those beats, that space. You can start at a kind of peaceful level, gradually build up, get our inciting incident, get all the challenges and conflicts coming in, and work up the narrative intensity by the time we get to the end, where we have our big dramatic fever pitch climax and all of that. With a short story, we don't get the grace of that space and time. So usually, digging into the theme, it becomes very evident almost from the off what this story is about, and almost also to intensity of momentum as we're coming into it. We all know the that advice of start in medias res all the time. Make sure something's happening. Now, in some cases, I don't agree with that being strictly start in medias res of the main plot, but start in medias res of something. However, when it comes to a short story, quite often we'll actually be starting beyond kind of medias res. We may even be coming in after the inciting incident. It's already happened, and we're just joining it to get the full momentum as we come into that story. We're starting with a sprint and just really getting into the action of what's happening. So high intensity. It's very, very focused on everything that's going on in the story, but not necessarily high intensity narrative.
Right, we're not saying that everything has to be this super thrilling, action-packed adventure, but you are going to be able to command a lot more focused attention than a full novel, and so you use that to your benefit, right? You can plunge somebody directly into a situation where the stakes are very high emotionally or whatever, in order to captivate the audience for that amount of time that you have, and you can hold their attention there and kind of keep it there within that short story format. It really works well for that. Somebody was asking, balancing pacing and intensity. Yeah, with a short story, I would say, again, you have to be very careful with pacing, because you can't really have, not that you can't have a slow moment, but you just don't have the luxury to really do too much of that, right? You do have to kind of keep things moving. I don't think you can quite do the varied pace as you can in a long form. What do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, you cut me under too much. However, This is to say, kind of being open to all genres and what short stories can do. Part of the reason I love them, which I think we'll get to in a minute anyway, in a bit more detail. But pacing does also connect with tone in a way. And sometimes a short story can be a little slower paced, a little dreamier, in a sense, if you understand what I mean, where things aren't just rocketing along with super pace all the way through, because it's more about the feel. It's more about the feeling of it. But that's also needs to be balanced with the idea that, when it comes to a short story, we do need that sort of bang for the buck, so to speak. It's a quick thing. People that read short stories are sitting down and expecting to finish the entire story in one sitting. They want to sit there, read it, finish it, and in that short time that they have with it, as that little experience, also be able to absorb the message and the feeling, whatever it is that story is conveying. It has to be a quick experience, and if it seems just to drag on and the slow pace isn't informing the tone that you want it to, it's just slow. Well, then you're going to run into problems, and that needs to be fixed up. But of course, in terms of actual solutions to that, it's really hard to say without seeing a piece that's suffering from that problem and seeing how it could be resolved there. But readers certainly can give you feedback on whether something is just slow for being slow, or whether it's actually giving the feel that you're after.
Yeah. Too much backstory for shorts can often be a death sentence for them. Yes. That gets to, we actually had another point, which was any tips for determining if idea is the right size for a short story. I think those both kind of go together, right? If this is a highly complex world building extravaganza, right, where in order just to understand the core conflict, you need quite a lot of time in which to get the audience kind of warmed up. Oh, this is how the world works, and now the world is broken, and let's fix it. It's probably not going to be a short story. Now, I'm not saying you can't have high concept short stories. They're done all the time. But what you'll often find in high concept short stories is they tend to fixate on a very specific and easy to understand conflict, and then don't really worry about the world building. Doesn't tend to be nearly on the level where it's like, okay, we're going to explore all the implications of the world in every which way. Obviously, you don't have time for that, right? So it'll pick a high concept, and then the actual conflict tends to be pretty simple if the concept is complex. So imagine it's some sort of crazy technology. Usually the conflict is something as simple as this person has access to it and wants it, and this person does, or something like that. On the flip side, I would say if the world building isn't that complex, then I would say then the actual conflict itself can be more complex. I don't know if you could really do both. I don't know if you could do like a super complicated like political intrigue plot and a complicated world building plot in a short story without it all kind of come crashing down. However, feel free to prove me wrong. I just wouldn't recommend that. Gareth?
Oh, same. I mean, there's lots of different approaches again, and these change across all different genres too. So very, very different ways you can approach it, but it's definitely a good thing. Just initially focus on really getting in there, as fast as possible.
I like this pushback. Any idea can be simplified, right? In theory, yes. I'm not saying it can't be done. The question is this if it's the best idea, right? Because if you're trying to do something where it's this complex, beautiful, rich world building situation, and yeah, you can spit it out and give you can look at Wikipedia synopsises for all kinds of more complicated works. However, that's not as good as reading the book, right? Because they've simplified it so much that even though it's understandable, you're missing all the flavors. So that was my point. Not that it's like impossible, but it's probably not going to serve you best. If it's too complicated of a setting and too complicated of a actual plot, like what's the conflict going on, you might be able to get away with one or the other, but not both. This is a good point for intensity. Writing genre fiction, how important is it to have the genre elements up front? Yeah, I would say, again, time is limited, right? And while I always think it's a good idea to lead into the genre as fast as possible, certainly for short stories, I think it's a good idea to lean into it quick. And you might be like, well, I don't have to lean into it too much. It's going to be part of a larger work and people are going to know what it is. It's going to be part of a horror anthology. So do I really have to lean into it too much? I would say you still do, because people don't know you necessarily. They don't know your story, and it's a hook. It's to let them know, oh, this is going to be the kind of story I'm going to enjoy. So I would lean into it as fast as you can.
Yeah, you can get a little more subtle there when it comes to horror as well, specifically Corey. The it's a good idea that people understand where they are as quickly as possible. However, there's also something to be said for surprise, where, for example, you could have a story, a horror story that starts off like some kind of summer, spring break romance or something like that. It's all happy and everything starts off and gradually gets darker until a shocking, horrific end. That kind of thing can really work. What I would recommend for that, though, is just add some more subtle tonal things into the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in the metaphors that you use in a few of the descriptions, it doesn't have to be all of them, but drop a few in early that make a little sense of unease before you
Mm-hmm.
then just settle into that kind of bright, happy spring break kind of thing that's all going on. And then we swing back around at the end as everything kind of degrades and becomes more and more dark. You can certainly do that, but I do recommend just having a little hint of it at the start so we sort of, we're established and know where we are.
And thinking about a short story with slow pace maybe can relate to time. For example, the last few minutes of a person's life can be slow paced yet very intense. True, right. High intensity, I mean, you can write a short story about something that literally is just a couple of seconds in time, depending on what it is you're trying to do, right? So no, but it's what we're getting at is just the stakes are there, and the high amount of fixation on the one idea, right? So it needs to be something that earns that. You're not going to be able to throw in a lot of elements to make it interesting. So that one element, I mean, not necessarily just one element, but the major core element is something that you're focused on and you're just, intensely looking at it, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, something that does that thing almost specifically is Incident at Owl Creek Ridge, I believe is the name of the short story.
Well, there we go. Yeah, there was somebody who asked about some recommendations for short stories. So maybe we can get to some a little bit later. All right. I recommend reading thrillers for the sake of prose. If you're not used to thinking, if you don't read a lot of short stories and you're like, well, I don't even, let's say you want to be involved in a short story, like just as an experiment, right? And you haven't read a lot of short stories, certainly read short stories. That's kind of obvious. But also look at things like thrillers, look at things at how they write and the quickness of the pace, because you might get ideas, even if you're not writing a thriller, of how to really earn every spot on the page. Think of something like Lee Child's work or something like that. Like just how lean and mean that prose is can really give you ideas on how you can create a complicated action sequence, but it doesn't actually take a lot of time in terms of word count. So just a little tip I have there.
I'd stuck on top of that. Read everything.
Yeah, well, right,
Read
that's true.
everything.
Yes, that kind of goes without saying, right? Read prologues. Yes, we said read everything, but yes, prologues often are short stories in of themselves, right? So imagine there's an author that you really like, and you like their style and their flavor, but they don't write short stories. We'll see maybe if they've written something that has a prologue in it, because often they are like more or less little short stories, not always, but often they can be. And that would give you an idea of how that author would tackle it, and might give you ideas on how to do it yourself as well. I like this. Read. Tammy apparently
Never stop.
Garrett, Tammy likes to do little Easter eggs, and then she gets to the genre reveal as the twist. That's an interesting idea. I mean, certainly you can get experimental with short stories. I think of short works, like a lot of Twilight Zone episodes are based on short stories, and some of those, even figuring out the genre, can be kind of tricky, and they're often a twist based thing, and they play with you. You're like, I don't even know where this is going. Is it going to be a happy ending? Is it going to be a sad ending? Like, what in the world is going on? And that's part of the appeal. So yes, you have a lot of play. I will say too, I talked earlier about twists maybe not hitting you as hard as in a longer form. But on the other hand, that can be to your benefit, especially if your twist is kind of gimmicky or fun. It could be the kind of thing that if you stretch somebody out for 60,000 words and they thought that was reality, and then you're like, aha, no, it's not, they would be really mad at you. But after 6,000 words, they're like, oh, that was kind of fun. And it would work a lot better. So, think of it like that. Like Garrett says, there's certainly movies, mysteries where people say, wow, they just stretched this out too long. It can be to your benefit to be short. I love a good twist too. All right, and that gets us to narrative freedom. Look what we did there. Nice segue. Yes, you do have a lot of narrative freedom within a short story, and I think one of the reasons why is because the commitment from the audience is not as much, and so they will be willing to kind of go with it because they're not committing a whole day of their life or however long the novel is going to be. It might just be a few minutes, and so in which case, like, yeah, show me what you can do. Let's kind of go with it, but. You might have some other ideas, Gareth, as to why narrative freedom comes into short stories.
Yeah, I'm going to go on a big gushing rant here because
all right, I love it.
It's particularly
rant away.
particularly what I love about the short form.
Fantastic.
Great little comment here. Sherry, I like that you can get a bit experimental because it is so short. 100% agreed. And it's kind of also why at the beginning of this session earlier, Anna, etc., I saw you all asking, can we have a beat sheet for short stories? My answer to that really would be no. Because
no.
I think the short form, and again, why I love it so much, is the options available to you. And it's frankly because, just like Daniel said, there's not a lot of investment in it, and it's not a time sink, and people aren't expecting that journey kind of structure that we talked about before when it comes to a short. However, short stories can be, but like I said, are not necessarily always that kind of standard story narrative. You have a main character who's kind of going about their life doing things, and they come upon a problem, and they have to take actions to solve that problem, and then that comes to a resolution. Great, that can work just well in a short format, with the caveat that we're usually dealing with a single event. Again, we're staying focused, whereas a novel can tackle many different events that are happening in a chain. Usually in a short story, it's just one thing. We resolve that, and then we're out. Bish bash bosh, as we say, and we're back out. However, one thing that I think that short stories can also really benefit from, and this kind of goes back to the essence of theme and what these stories are actually about. They are condensed punches, a short story in terms of thematic elements. And they can actually just use the events, or the plot, the things that are happening are simply a background to actually interrogate the emotional themes of the story itself. It's not really what's happening that's important. It's what is buried within it. It's what the story is saying to you, what the author is saying to you. I think since shorts are so condensed and intense, again going back to that intensity, this can make shorts uniquely impactful, I think, when tackling single concepts. One that I'm always on about because hey, it's heightened emotion is things that like grief and loss. What becomes important about a story like that isn't the action but the feeling behind it. So why you can read something like that, not having been kind of walked through or told about a series of thrilling events in a way, but you still have, by the end of it, the tone of it and what it's delivered to you has been a feeling. You've really felt it. I just call these kind of things mood pieces generally, because it's not about the story. In the long form, that generally won't work too well because, like Dana said, people are more invested and they'll start to feel, fall away from it if they don't feel that much is really happening. Though in a short experience, it's way more punchy. I can kind of demonstrate this. Sorry if any of this sounds a little grim, just based, but it's kind of brings together a lot of the things we talked about here about short stories, just using some of my own as an example. One of my own called Companions, for example, it initially came to me in a concept, and that concept was, okay, we've got a main character whose dog has died, and even though he's kind of in his grief and his daily routine is still topping up the dog's food bowl with food every morning, the bowl doesn't overflow. It's just staying the way it is. It always seems to be at the same level. So me being kind of obsessed with all things creepy and discomforting, when I had that idea, I wanted to do something disturbing with it. I was like, what can I make? How is this food disappearing from this bowl, and how can I torture this guy with it? And when I actually sat down to write the story, I put the first few sentences down, and the story itself just wouldn't go that way. At the time of writing it, I was going through my own period of grief after losing a dog, and everything just developed into this heartfelt slice of melancholia. Is about the only way I could describe it. So what I had to say with that story just completely escaped that concept. The concept is still in there, but it's only a line or two. It just adds an extra layer to the sadness of the whole thing. And throughout that whole story, nothing really happens that you could consider wild or exciting or explosive, but that's not the point. It's the feeling that you're left with at the end, which is very different from what it was supposed to be when I sat down to write it. I think on a similar bent, using another one, short stories can be way more intensely allegorical in the narrative than you would get away with in a full-length story, again, because people are just there for the punch. There's another story I'm working on called Soft, and that one is an observation I just felt compelled to make, thinking about how, as a culture, we have a propensity for turning people's suffering into a form of entertainment. Specifically, kind of sitting there, it came to me while I was sitting one night watching one of these murder documentaries. And I was thinking about, well, if people are really so involved into that, thinking about it psychologically and in layers, there's a sense of desensitization there. But because it's hyper reality in a sense, disconnected from us, perhaps that makes us less prepared for when tragedy strikes in your own home. We never, when we're sitting watching these things and talking about them and philosophizing and everything with the other person on the sofa over our TV dinner, we're never presuming that one day we'll be the person on that TV. And so I wanted to do something with that, and I made that story from the perspective of a young boy whose parents are basically addicted to watching all this stuff that's all their evenings. And then when their daughter is killed, the parents start to go through this weird metamorphosis where they're just turning into basically shriveled fruit. If you imagine a rotting kiwi fruit with crinkled skin and very, very soft underneath. And the story just ends with this young boy who's becoming more detached. In their grief, they're pushing him away and not seeing to their child. And he attempts to hug his mother at the end. And she just mules as everything splits open and this soft mush all underneath just comes out. And that's it. It's really the end there. So like I've seen a few comments in terms of endings too. Short stories, by the nature of that intensity, can tend to have very abrupt beginnings and ends. You don't have to. You can start after the inciting incident, and you don't necessarily have the time to offer a softer denouement, to round things out after this climax. Sometimes you have the climax and that's it. The story just stops. And they can be unresolved endings as well. I saw a question in comments earlier about do we think unresolved endings are overplayed when it comes to short fiction? And certainly not. I don't think so. As long as the thematic message, what you're discussing kind of beneath the surface of that story, has been completed, is finished and done, then the short story has done its job. We can leave then with the the character standing on the shore of the island with still no idea if he's going to be rescued. That can be a perfect ending because everything that we've seen before that was the conversation. The rest isn't relevant. I hope that makes sense.
Like this. Glad I wasn't eating a kiwi. Thanks for the visual, Gareth. Well, we can always.
Sorry for any stomach churnings.
We can always rely on Gareth to take things in a very exciting manner. That's why we keep him around.
I can see Anna mentioned, to self-stop using the beat sheet for short stories. You can, and just condense that all down into, like I said, some short stories can be just a really quick narrative. They'll use that same kind of pyramid structure, go up, down, finish off. That's absolutely fine. They can work. But I think where they really blossom and become more is when it's not really the events that are the point. It's what's buried within there. And both are equally valid. I think both are great experiences. But I like the short form for that because people are more apt to stay on for things that are more less about the events, let's say.
Yeah. Janine says, I'm usually more accepting of abrupt endings and tragic endings in short stories. We haven't had enough time to attach to the characters. I think that's true. I think tragedy is a more acceptable ending in short story than it is in long form for a lot of audience members for that reason. Because again, just like I was saying with plot twists, you have not spent, thousands upon thousands of pages getting attached to somebody, and then the author's like, no, they're not going to get what they want. Oh, and they're going to be miserable. Have a nice day. And not that there's anything wrong with tragedies. They can be beautiful to read, but they often are not what audience members are looking for when they're looking for a long journey story. They want to land in a better place, especially depending on the genre. But short form, yeah, you can. It's a lot easier, I think, to get away with things like that. The other thing I love about the short form is that you can end in a tragedy that isn't like a tragedy that you could. It's an ending that's completely different than what you can do in a long form. I think of Ray Bradbury's story about the girl on Venus locked in the closet, right? It's such a great short story about like bullying and stuff. Anyway, that sort of thing wouldn't work in a long form, really, if that's like, well, it all just builds up to just this person missing this event because of bullies. I mean, yeah, I guess you could stretch that out, but it probably wouldn't land very well because it's ultimately, the stakes of that really punch you in the gut because it's such a tragic ending for the amount of time we spent with the person, right? But if you spent 80,000 words and it's like, oh, okay, well, that was a really bad day, but do I really care that much? It just works a lot better in short story form. Let's see what else we've got here in terms of comments. Somebody says that they feel a lot of short stories do have open endings. I think it is more common to do that because, again, like Garrett says, the audience expectation is not the same for a short story. They know it's not that same kind of time commitment. They're not promised necessarily that the character is going to have, a major change or growth or anything like that. Not that I recommend being stagnant, but it's just not the same, right? You can tell a short story about a very stubborn person who ends up very stubborn at the end, and it could be very effective in a way that if it was a full-length novel, you would just go crazy. You would like throw it against the wall probably. It'd be or at least would be a more limiting piece in terms of its appeal. Just because not many people want to do that. They want to see more happen.
Yeah, that point brings me back. I could see the comment here from Esquire. I think some genres that work better short stories. Slice of lice. Slice of lice? Slice of life.
Slice of lice?
I don't want a slice of lice. No, thank you. Slice of life works best as a short story. Yeah, certainly for me. I think I'm personally not really a fan of slice of life movies. Or this kind of... a lot of them are mumblecore ones in a way as well. People just kind of sit around and talk and not really much is going on. And then all of a sudden it's over. They tend to infuriate me. There's not much going on there. However, in the shorter sense, like slice of life comedies can be really, really funny. It's just in short form, short doses.
It's the same thing I feel like I come from the theater world. There's a lot of stuff I'll watch. I'm like, that would have been a great 1-act play or like a 10-minute play. I hated it as a long form play because it's just people arguing about something. And that could be very effective, in short form. But yeah, long form, no. All right. So think of the bones when you're writing your story. What is at the core of it? You're not going to have the luxury to just build it up, right? So those bones really have to land. You have to be talking about something that matters and something that we can really fixate on based on a more simplistic concept to fixate on versus being able to make it complicated and nuanced. And to some degree, that can be more challenging than making something that's longer because in the sense of a novel, it's like, I could throw in a lot of elements. It's like a big stew and eventually the flavor will come through. Whereas this is like, what are those core ingredients, right? You only have a few ingredients. It's like those natural bars, right? Where they have like the 4 things listed to make you feel like they're all natural and everything. It's kind of like that, right? And each one of those then therefore really has to stand on its own. So think about the core of what's going on for sure. Yeah, what message do you want to convey is another good thing to think about.
Yeah, let's get those bones, like all the bones, the character theme, what it's about, and really get strongly focused on that. Kind of ties here, Kristen, asking, because you don't have much space to develop characters, do you think short stories are more plot driven? Yes, sometimes they are in terms of certainly more concept driven than character driven, because you don't have the space to really get to know somebody, so you're plopping them in a really, again, intense kind of situation and building up with that. But it becomes more, they're usually way more focused on the concept alone than a full novel would be, where we get to explore character as well and interact in all these different ways.
Characters also do end up a little bit flatter. You just don't have the time to fill in all those details, right? You might see the character in a very angry moment and you don't really know what they're like when they're happy because you never even see them in that state because of the amount of time you have in the story, right? So, but that's okay. Trim. Yes, you're going to have to edit this thing and edit some more. Not that you shouldn't do that with novels. Please do that with novels. But often you don't even have the choice because, Amazon isn't going to kick back your novel if it's over 74,000 words. However, lots of times people will kick back your short story for a contest or submission if it is even 1 word too long. You've got to be careful and trim. Do you have the same amount of dialogue in short stories? I would say that really varies. I don't think there's a tried and true to that. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, maybe not. A couple of the ones that I, just the ones of mine I just talked about, Companions has none. It's just a narrative stream, whereas Soft obviously has dialogue with the characters interacting. So it's completely dependent on the story.
Slice of Lice is a microscopic short. Well, there you go. You got a prompt. All right.
Our next prompt, Slice of Lice.
Do we have anything else to talk about short stories before I reveal what's behind this curtain, Gareth?
Just one thing I would say as well, you'll always tend as a writer to butt up against the concept of show don't tell. That's always in the back of your mind, and you think,
Yeah.
well, everything should be dramatized and detailed and all of that. Of course, short stories are more forgiving in that regard, because the more showing you do, the more you get into detail of description and of the action, and try to demonstrate how characters are, their personalities. It eats up word count. Which would be detrimental to the short story because, again, it can drag down the pace, starts to remove that bang for the buck for the time you're spending with it. So think about that. You do have a little more freedom there. Where you might try to demonstrate that a character is a miserable person, a short story could begin with a nice little hook saying, like, Gareth was a miserable man. Just set it straight up telling, and that's it.
Right.
But we're like, okay, get me into it, and let's get to the point. So you do have a bit more freedom there. Don't beat yourself up when you're trying to do shorts. If that's part of the problem that you find, it's like, I can't keep it to 5,000 words because I have to show, not tell. Dial it back a bit. Forgive yourself a little more.
Especially to like some, I don't want to say like info dump world building stuff too much. Like, obviously, again, this gets back to how complex should your scenario be, that so you can kind of lead the audience in. But whereas you wouldn't typically begin a book with, in this world, blah 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 blah, you might do like a sentence like that pretty early on in a short story just to establish and people understand, well, yeah, you have a limited amount of space. You can't exactly show me this technology, right? It's just going to be spat out. That's like, okay, in this world they use this, and it's just how it is.
And there's a couple of things here I'm going to point out just before we do our big reveal. I know we're going to hit time here, but Willie, what's the story of 3,000 to 6,000 words called? A short story. That's
Yes.
falling right within the realm. I don't want to scroll to try to find the full comment, but there was a question about the word count of an anthology. What would that be? When you're talking an anthology, that kind of falls with whoever's editing the anthology. If you're thinking of putting a personal collection of short stories together, that's entirely up to you. But personally, I like to make sure I'm over 50K, again, just to give people the value for the cover cost of a book. I like to make sure that I pack enough stories in there to reach the 50K mark.
All right. Slice of Lice, A Tale of Beet and Mushroom Love. Wow, we're just mixing all our meta references
now.
Those are some deep cuts. I apologize for those of you who are joining us for the first time. There's a lot of inside baseball going on there. All right, so are we ready to show the audience what's behind this curtain?
Go for it.
I feel like Extreme Home Makeover. It's like, move that bus. Yes, we're going to move the curtain. I'll move myself out of the way to reveal what's behind the curtain. You might have wondered, you might have guessed, well, with all of this talk about short story, but yes, indeed, it is time for us to do our community writing challenge for 2022. Woohoo! Woo. So excited. Yes. And yes, it is going to be a short story challenge. So if you were inspired to create a short story, well, you're going to be able to get involved in our community writing challenge, which is going to begin in just a few weeks. So stay tuned for this channel for more details. Anything that we want to spill the beans about right now? Do we have I guess we have a link below there.
Well, if you haven't encountered it before, we're kicking off on May 3rd. We will have, you'll see it coming up on the YouTube channel. And those of you who are members with us will see it in the community events. We'll put them all in today, so you'll see the dates for things. But we're kicking off the writing period on May 3rd, and that will run until May 17th. There will, of course, be prizes to be won from great people like our friends at Writers Inc. Jay Thorne has given us a copy of his book, The 3-Story Method, which is fabulous, to give away as a prize. And our friends at Book Baby as well, much thanks to them, are giving us a book cover design service to give away. So there will be a prize draw at the end. And as you all know, hopefully if you've been with us for the past couple of years, there will also be the same kind of grand prize thing where if you like, you can submit your short story and our jury, which includes us and some of our sponsors, will look through and come up with a list of winners to receive their very own printed anthology, which you can keep on your shelf as a little trophy. That's only sent to the authors whose work kind of wins, quote unquote, and is inside there. So it's not tied to an ISBN. It's not an official publication. You can still submit your story elsewhere and get paid for it, as I hope you would like to do. So it's just a great little trophy to have, and thank you for participating. Of course, if you register, you're up for a random prize anyway. So the link on your screen is active right now. That's autocrit.com/challenge2022. You will need to pop over and register if you want to be in the running for the prize draw, because we have to have the names at the back end. And we'll get you sorted out. So all the details are there. We will also be emailing about it and everything. Of course, it's still 2 weeks away, so don't stress up too much. There is a theme. You'll find out the theme after you register, and the limit is 5,000 words, just so you know. We treat all of the submissions as though this is an anthology call, to have everybody treat it as though it's a professional, piece of work that you would be submitting your work to. So it's a hard limit between 2,000 and 5,000 words. Theme will be revealed when you register, and get writing, get in for a prize. We'll be doing live streams and all sorts during the couple of weeks that the challenge runs. So it's going to be exciting. I hope you're all excited.
Exciting.
Feel free to share the link with your friends as well. This is a fully public thing, not restricted to anybody. So we're open to anyone and everyone who will come in and join us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And we have a couple comments. Does it have to be fully polished? Obviously, we are going to be analyzing. This is not a random draw, right? So the better quality, the more of a chance you are of making it to the final round and making it into the published anthology. Well, printed anthology, I should say, because it's not exactly published. But
the hope is that after the 2 weeks, when we get to the submission period, which will run just to the end of that second week, or into the third week, maybe. I'm trying to think of my times here. But yes, if you want to submit one, we will be treating it as though we are editors of an anthology. We're looking for professionally written, self-edited, ready to go, as if you were actually submitting it to somebody for publishing.
All right, sounds great. And yes, there will be more details as we roll along. So please like, subscribe, hit the bell. Join us on this YouTube channel. Share it with your friends, anybody you know who enjoys writing. Because, we will be kicking it off May 4th. So super exciting. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see you all there.
Let me just drop the link into the chat there. And Stephanie was asking cost. Nothing. It's free. Just come along and join us. We're going to have a couple of weeks of fun. So we'll see you there. And I think next week we're talking about theme as well. So there is a theme tied to these stories, and we'll talk about theme next week and how to implement that in a story in really effective ways. So hopefully see you there as well.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.